So now let's go back to x squared. We have already talked about in this lesson that x squared passes the vertical line test, so it is a function, but it does not pass the horizontal line test, so the inverse is not a function. However, we can do something called restrict the domain, meaning only use a piece of this graph. And if we restrict that domain, we can force it to pass the horizontal line test and the vertical line test. So you can see here, they took our whole parabola and then they just erased the left half. So we're only using the right half. We're only using x greater than or equal to 0, the right half. And now if I look at this right half, passes the vertical line test, check. Passes the horizontal line test, check. So this restriction allows it to be 1, 2, 1. Passes both tests. So now that it passes both tests, now we can find the inverse, which is going to be the same way. We change the f of x to a y. We switch the x and y places, and then we solve for y. Now we know that anytime we take the square root, we get a plus or minus. But in this case, I don't want to use the minus because I want it to stay positive, just like my domain restriction was there. So now I have an inverse, and because it is only the positive side, it is graphed like this, and it is indeed still a function, passes the vertical and horizontal line tests. And we can still see that if we do draw that diagonal line, there are reflections across it. So there's a little bit more about the x squared. Let's put all of this together into a final problem. We're going to start with B, actually, where we're going to graph this function and its inverse. So let's start by graphing this. So I have a plus 2 inside, which is going to mean left 2. And I have a minus 1 outside, which is down 1. So I take my square root of x graph, which parent function looks like that. And I'm going to move all those points left 2, down 1. Left 2, down 1. Left 2, down 1. Which is going to give me, see if I can erase this little dot. Oh, nope, too much. There we go. That gives me that graph. Now let's find the inverse. So change this to a y, flip the x and y places, and then solve for y. So add 1 to both sides, square both sides, minus 2, and y is by itself. And now I can change it to my inverse symbol. And ta-da! There we go. So I've got that works now. This is my inverse equation. Let's graph it. So I know this is an x squared. However, it's not going to be the full parabola because we know since we started with the square root, we're only going to have half the parabola, just like we did in that last example. So I'm going to graph the whole parabola and then erase the left half so it's still 1 to 1. So I have a plus 1 on the inside. That means right 1. Excuse me. And a minus 2 on the outside, which means down 2. So I'm going to take my parabola there's my parabola parent graph, the right half anyway, and move right 1 down 2. And I have right 1 down 2, and right 1 down 2. Oh no, too much. And I've got the right half of my parabola, which is right there. Oh my gosh, I totally made a mistake. Hopefully some of you guys are looking at this like, Mrs. Johnson, you're being an idiot right now. Totally forgot to make this opposite. It's not right 1, left 1. I was like, that doesn't look right. Okay, let's try this again. Left 1, down 2. Ah, looks so much better. Left 1, down 2. Left 1, down 2. Oh, much better. There we go. Sorry, guys. Totally made a common mistake right there. Now that's better. And now, if we draw my diagonal line, you can see that they're reflected across the diagonal line. That's how I know it wasn't right. It wasn't reflecting right. Okay, so I've got one example done. Let's end with the hardest example. This example requires you to do some things like the quadratic formula and completing the square that you may not remember how to do from secondary math 2. That is okay. If you don't remember how to do this, we're going to talk all about it in 2.1 when we start that. So if I lose you in this problem, that's okay. You're not going to have anything like this yet, because we're going to move on to 2.1 and talk more about completing the square and quadratic formula and all that stuff when we get there. So I still want to do it for you, but if you get a little lost, that's okay. You'll be fine. So first thing I'm going to do right here is completing the square. If you don't remember completing the square, a little tutorial. Once again, if this is too much for you, that's okay. You can end the movie right now. You'll be fine. For completing the square, you always start by taking your middle term, take the number, and divide it by 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is a negative 1. That's always how you start it. Now, we're going to take this x minus 1 and FOIL it out. So I get x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x. Negative 1 times x, negative 1x. And negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. So far I have x squared minus 2x plus 1. Notice that this almost matches what I start with. However, instead of this plus 1, I want it to be plus 4. So what do I need to do? I need to add 3. Because 1 plus 3 gives me the 4 that I want. And that right there is your completing the square. You're all done. So now that I've completed the square, this parabola is going to be a whole lot easier to graph. Because I want this parabola that has been shifted right 1 and up 3. So parabola, shift right 1, up 1, 2, 3. Right 1, up 1, 2, 3. And let's see. Right 1, up 1, 2, 3. So there's my parabola. And notice the domain restriction. I only want, this time I only want less than or equal to 1. So I only want the left half of the parabola. So let's do left half of this parabola. I'm just making it symmetric because I know all parabolas are symmetric. So there's my whole parabola, and I only want the left half, so I'm going to erase all that. So this is what I'm dealing with now. Now let's find my inverse. So if you remember, you flip your x's and y's. So So I can minus 3. Square root it. Now remember, anytime you square root, you do have that plus or minus. And I know that because I'm keeping the left half of my parabola, I want to keep the minus. That's the half that I want to keep. And then add 1. So I've got y equals negative square root of x minus 3 plus 1. And change it to my inverse sign. And there we go. So this is my square root graph that has been moved right 3, that has been reflected up and down, and has been moved up 1. So let's take my square root graph, and we're going to move it right 1, 2, 3, reflect it up and down, and move it up 1, right 1, 2, 3, reflect it up and down, and move up 1, and then last one, go right 1, 2, 3, reflect it up and down, and go up 1. So there's my square root graph. And you'll notice that once again, they are reflected across the diagonal line. So that is everything that we need to talk about with inverses. You are officially done with 1.5, and you can get started on your homework.